All right, let's talk about two names that, if you were online in the 90s, you definitely remember: RealPlayer and Winamp. This is really the story of two software titans that just defined an era. They were locked in this battle for our screens, our speakers, really for the future of the early internet itself.
So to really understand the story, you've got to go back with me. I want you to picture it. The year is 1998. The dot-com boom is just exploding, and for most people, the internet is this brand new, kind of weird, and honestly, pretty clunky place.
Oh man, you remember this, right? That sound of the dial-up modem connecting. Waiting, 10 minutes for one song to download? It felt like an eternity. And video? Forget about it. If you got anything to play, it was the size of a postage stamp, and it was constantly stuck on that one awful word, buffering.
So how in the world did we get from that, that slow, painful experience, to the world we live in now where we just hit play and everything streams instantly? Well, the whole journey really starts with these two rivals who had completely, and I mean completely, different ideas about what the internet was supposed to become.
All right, so this kicks off what we can call the dial-up revolution. See, the digital world was just figuring itself out, and there was this huge problem. How do you get audio and video to people? Two major players emerged to try and solve this, and man, they could not have been more different in their approach.
So first on the scene, you had RealPlayer. This was way back in 1995, and look, you have to give them their due. These guys were genuine pioneers. They basically invented the concept of streaming. For the very first time, you didn't have to wait for a whole file to download. You could just play it as it was coming in. That was mind-blowing stuff.
And people's minds were just blown. I mean, yeah, the quality was terrible and it was always buffering, but it didn't matter. It felt like magic. It really was like seeing a little piece of the future right there on your computer screen. But, that honeymoon phase didn't last long. The whole buffering thing went from an annoyance to a public joke. And it got worse. People started to see RealPlayer as this intrusive, bloated piece of software. Some even called it malware. It was always nagging you to upgrade, it used its own weird file formats, and it really started to annoy people who just wanted something simple that worked.
And all that frustration, it created this perfect opening for a challenger. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because it sets up this classic battle, the original pioneer versus what would soon be known as the people's player.
So in 1997, along comes Winamp, and it was everything RealPlayer wasn't. It did one thing, and it did it perfectly: play your MP3s. That was it. It was tiny, it was fast, it was free, and it was all about the community.
And you just gotta love their slogan, right? Winamp, it really whips the llama's ass. I mean, that perfectly captured its whole vibe. It was quirky, it was rebellious, it was a little weird. It told you right away this wasn't some boring corporate software. This was something different.
So you had these two totally opposite visions for the internet, right? On one side, RealPlayer was all about control, their own formats, their own streaming tech. On the other, Winamp was completely open and all about the community. RealPlayer's big thing was live streams, but Winamp's magic was in the customization. The thousands of skins and plugins people made. It was a paid, corporate model versus a free, user-driven one, just polar opposites.
So this huge philosophical difference really set the stage for an epic battle, a true clash of titans. But here's the thing, they weren't the only ones in the game. Their rivalry was happening, but a new, and I mean incredibly powerful force was about to enter the ring. Just think about it for a second. Even with Winamp being awesome, you still had to go find it and download it. But what if you didn't have to? What if the player you needed was already on your computer the moment you turned it on?
Yeah, you can see how their paths were kind of running in parallel for a while. RealPlayer kicks things off in 95 with streaming. Winamp comes along in 97 and masters customization. But then you get to the big disruptions. For RealPlayer, the giant threat was Windows Media Player, which Microsoft started bundling with Windows. And for Winamp, it was getting bought by AOL for a staggering amount of money, right at the peak of the dot-com craze.
And that AOL deal, man, it was just such a tragic irony, wasn't it? Here's this program that was built from the ground up by its community, this symbol of freedom and customization, and it gets swallowed whole by this giant, top-down corporation that had no idea what made it special. And just like that, all the cool innovation, it just stopped for years. And this really brings us to the beginning of the end for both of them. It was like a perfect storm was brewing. You had all this new technology popping up, plus some really bad decisions on their part, and it all came together to make these two former giants, well,
pretty much obsolete. I mean, look at how fast the world changed around them. In the mid-90s, with dial-up, they were the undisputed kings. But then boom, broadband internet arrives and suddenly Real Player's tiny, buffering streams look pathetic. Then boom, Apple comes out with iTunes and the iPod, creating this perfect, sealed ecosystem that Winamp just couldn't break into. And the final nail in the coffin? YouTube and smartphones. Suddenly, nobody cared about a desktop media player anymore.
And the missed opportunities here are just staggering. I mean, think about this. A former employee said that Real Networks, the company that made Real Player, had everything they needed. They had the tech, they had the head start, they could have been YouTube. But they got arrogant, they stopped thinking about what users actually wanted, and they completely missed the boat on the biggest thing to happen to online video.
But you know what's crazy? The story doesn't just end there with them fading away. In a twist I don't think anyone saw coming, both of these old-school brands are actually still around today, trying to find a new life. And the way they've changed is just wild. Real Player, the pioneer of streaming, it's now basically a side business for a company focused on enterprise AI, and the player itself is mostly used to download videos from places like YouTube and TikTok. And Winamp, the people's MP3 player, they're trying to reinvent it as a platform for musicians and creators, though honestly it's been a bit of a bumpy road for them. So when you step back and look at the big picture, what's their real legacy? Well, it's literally everywhere. The streaming technology that Real Player pioneered, that's the bedrock of Netflix, YouTube, Spotify, everything. And Winamp's whole idea of a customizable platform with plugins, that's the ancestor of the app stores on our phones. They really established the two core philosophies, the closed corporate model and the open community one, that are still fighting it out in tech today.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. Their whole fight was about a closed, walled garden approach versus an open, community-driven platform. So when you look around today at Apple's ecosystem versus Android's, for example, you have to wonder, did anyone really win that war? Or is it a battle that never really ended?